day, my name is Cherise and I'm a BE Legal Advisor at SEESA.
Good day, I'm Eileen, a BE Legal Advisor at the SEESA Head Office in Pretoria. Welcome to the SEESA BE recording. Today we will discuss the priority elements under the BE scorecard. First and foremost, let's look at what is broad-based economic empowerment. Broad-based economic empowerment, also known as BEE, is a central part of the South African government's transformation strategy. BEE comprises out of various components aimed at increasing the number of Black people who manage, own, and control the country's economy, whilst decreasing the racially based income inequalities. When referred to Black people, the Act refers to South African citizens who have been racially classified as African, Indian, or coloured. A BEE scorecard mostly comprises out of 5 elements and is measured out of 100 points. This excludes the bonus points, with the exception to some sector codes.
There are 3 priority elements: ownership, skills development, enterprise development, and supply development, including procurement. With regards to the priority elements, a QSE, meaning an entity with a turnover between 10 million and 50 million, is required to comply with the sub-minimum requirements for ownership as a compulsory element, as well as the sub-minimum requirements for either skills development or enterprise and supply development. However, a generic entity, meaning an entity with a turnover exceeding 50 million, is required to comply with the sub-minimum requirements for all 3 priority elements. If any of the sub-minimum requirements are not met, a measured entity will be deemed to drop 1 BE level, also referred to as being discounted 1 level. In other words, if a business scores sufficient points to be a level 3 BE contributor, but fails to meet one of the sub-minimum requirements, such an entity will be deemed to be a level 4 BE contributor. We will now look at each priority element individually. Eileen, will you please explain the ownership element to us?
Thank you, Cherise. Ownership is the first priority element on the BEE scorecard. Ownership measures the percentage of Black ownership or shareholding in the measured entity. The measured entity will need to reach a sub-minimum target of 40% of the net value. Failure to do so will result in the measured entity being discounted 1 level, irrespective of its overall scoring. Cherise, now that we know the importance of the ownership element, will you provide us with more information regarding the skills element?
Sure, Eileen, thank you. The skills development element measures the skills expenditure that an entity spends on skills development programs for Black employees and Black people. Employers are required by law to pay an amount equal to the prescribed percentage of their total payroll to the National Skills Fund in terms of the Skills Development Act and the Skills Development Levies Act. Companies can also score points for the number of learnerships they facilitate for Black people, Black women, and Black disabled people, the amount of money they spend on bursary programs, and the implementation of mentorship programs. This is a priority element, and the measured entity would need to reach the sub-minimum target of 40% to avoid being discounted 1 level on their overall score. The next element is enterprise and supply development.
Thank you, Cherise. The enterprise and supply development is the last priority element and has 3 components: preferential procurement, enterprise development, and supply development. Points for preferential procurement are scored depending on the extent to which measured entities procure goods and services from Black empowered suppliers who comply with the specific criteria to qualify as an empowering supplier. In essence, a certain percentage of a measured entity's expenditure with an empowering supplier is recognized as BEE expenditure, depending on that supplier's BEE level. Entities can increase their score on this element if they procure a greater percentage of goods and services from suppliers with higher BEE ratings, from small businesses such as QSEs and EMEs, from suppliers that are at least 51% Black owned, and from suppliers that are at least 30% Black female owned. Cherise, will you please provide us with more information regarding the enterprise and supply development components under this element?
Yes, thank you, Eileen. Points are scored for enterprise development in relation to the contribution, both monetary and non-monetary, that an entity makes to developing businesses that are owned by Black people. The target that applies to enterprise development are set as a percentage of the measured entity's net profit after tax. Supply development refers to the enterprise development contribution that an entity makes to its Black-owned suppliers. The target that applies to supply development are also set as a percentage of the measured entity's net profit after tax. This is a priority element, and the measured entity would need to reach the sub-minimum target of 40% in all three categories to avoid being discounted at one level.
Looking at the different sector codes, it should be noted that the same applies for all. The only exception is in respect of the transport sector. There is no priority elements applicable in this sector. Furthermore, when using the specialized scorecard where the measured entity is exempted from ownership, a QSE entity is only required to reach a sub-minimum for either skills or enterprise and supply development, whereas a generic entity on the specialized scorecard has to reach the sub-minimum on skills as well as enterprise and supply development. Thank you for your time. We trust that this was informative. Should you require any further information, kindly contact your nearest SEESA branch.